Laws, Chapter 10. Laws concern war and defense.
And now, after discussing acts of violence, let us summarize all violent acts under a single law, which shall be as follows: no one shall take or steal any of their neighbor's belongings, nor shall they use anything that belongs to their neighbor without the owner's consent. These are the offenses that have been and will continue to be the source of all the evils. The most significant offenses are the excesses and insolence of youth, especially when they are committed against religion. These offenses are particularly grave when they violate public and sacred rituals, or the shared rituals of tribes and clans. The offenses are also serious when they are committed against private rituals and burial sites. Additionally, insults against parents are a third degree of violence. The fourth type of violence occurs when someone, disregarding the authority of rulers, takes, steals, or uses something that belongs to them without their consent. The fifth type is when the violation of an individual's civil rights requires compensation. There should be a common law that encompasses all these cases. We have already discussed the punishment for sacrilege, whether it is fraudulent or violent. Now, we need to determine the punishment for those who speak or act insolently towards the gods. But first, we must give them a warning, which may be as follows: no one who believes in the existence of gods and obedience to the laws ever intentionally commits any unholy act or speaks any unlawful word. However, those who do commit such acts must believe one of three things: either that the gods do not exist, which is the first possibility, or that if they do exist, they do not care about humans, or thirdly, that they can easily be appeased and swayed from their intentions through sacrifices and prayers.
What should we say or do to these people?
My good friend, let us first hear the mocking remarks that I suspect they will make against us.
What kind of remarks?
They will make some disrespectful comments like this: "O inhabitants of Athens, Sparta, and Knossos," they will reply, "you speak the truth. Some of us deny the very existence of the gods, while others, as you say, believe that they do not care about us, and still others believe that they can be swayed from their course by gifts. Now, as you yourself acknowledged, we have the right to demand that before you judge and threaten us, you should argue with us and convince us. You should attempt to teach and persuade us that there are gods through reasonable evidence, and that they are too good to be unjust or to be appeased or swayed by gifts. When we hear such things said about the gods by those who are considered the best poets, orators, prophets, priests, and countless others, most of us are not motivated to abstain from unjust acts, but rather to commit them and then seek atonement. When lawmakers claim to be gentle and not harsh, we believe that they should first use persuasion and demonstrate the existence of gods to us, if not in a better way than others, at least in a truer way. Who knows, we will listen to you. If our request is fair, please accept our challenge.
But is it difficult to prove the existence of the gods?
How would you prove it?
How? Firstly, the earth, the sun, the stars, the universe, and the orderly seasons, divided into years and months, provide evidence of their existence. Additionally, all Greeks and non-Greeks believe in them.
I fear, my dear friend, although I do not pay much attention to it, that the profane will mock us. You do not understand the nature of their complaint, and you believe that they turn to impiety solely out of a love for sensual pleasure.
Stranger, what other reason is there?
There is a profoundly serious kind of ignorance that is considered the greatest wisdom.
What do you mean?
In Athens, there are written tales that your virtuous state, as I have been informed, refuses to accept. These tales, in both prose and verse, speak of the gods. The oldest of these tales recount the origin of the heavens and the world. Not long after the beginning of the story, they describe the birth of the gods and how they interacted with each other. I do not wish to be too critical of these stories, whether they have a positive or negative influence in other ways, because they are ancient. However, when considering the duties of children towards their parents, I cannot praise them or consider them useful or true. I have nothing more to say about the words of the ancients, and I would only like to speak of them in a way that pleases the gods. But when it comes to our younger generation and their wisdom, I cannot let them off the hook when they cause harm. Consider the effect of their words. When you and I argue for the existence of the gods and present the sun, moon, stars, and earth as evidence, claiming that they possess divine qualities, if we were to listen to the aforementioned philosophers, we would say that these are merely earth and stones, which have no concern for human affairs. They would claim that all religion is a fabrication of words and a pretense.
One such teacher, O stranger, would be bad enough, and you imply that there are many of them, which is worse.
Well, then, what shall we say or do? Shall we assume that someone is accusing us among unholy men, who are trying to escape from the effect of our legislation, and that they say of us how dreadful that you should legislate on the assumption that there are gods? Shall we defend ourselves? Or shall we ignore them and return to our laws, lest the introduction becomes longer than the law? For the discussion will certainly become lengthy if we are to address the impiously inclined as they desire, partly explaining to them in detail the things they demand an explanation for, partly making them afraid or dissatisfied, and then proceeding to the necessary enactments.
Yes, stranger, but how many times have we already said that on this occasion there is no reason brevity should be preferred over length, for who is at our heels, as the saying goes, and it would be insignificant and ridiculous to prefer the shorter to the better. It is of great importance, in some way or another, to prove that there are gods, and that they are good, and value justice more than humans do. The demonstration of this would be the best and noblest introduction to all our laws. And therefore, without impatience and without haste, let us thoroughly consider the whole matter, summoning all the power of persuasion that we possess.
Seeing you so earnest, I would like to offer a prayer that I may succeed, but I must proceed immediately. Who can remain calm when called upon to prove the existence of the gods? Who can avoid hating and abhorring the men who are and have been the cause of this argument? I am referring to those who will not believe the stories which they have heard as children from their mothers and nurses, repeated by them both in jest and earnest, like charms, who have also heard them in the prayers during sacrifices, and witnessed the sights accompanying them, sights and sounds delightful to children and their parents during the sacrifices, showing intense earnestness on behalf of their children and themselves, and talking to the gods with eager interest, beseeching them, as though they were firmly convinced of their existence, who also see and hear the prostrations and invocations made by Greeks and foreigners at the rising and setting of the sun and moon, and all the ups and downs of life, not as if they thought that there were no gods, but as if there could be no doubt of their existence and no suspicion of their non-existence, when men, knowing all these things, despise them without any real grounds, as would be admitted by anyone with any intelligence, and when they force us to say what we are now saying, how can anyone remonstrate with them in gentle terms, when he has to begin by proving to them the very existence of the gods? Yet the attempt must be made, for it would be unseemly for one half of mankind to go mad in their pursuit of pleasure, and the other half in their indignation at such people. Our address to these lost and perverted individuals should not be spoken in anger. Let us imagine ourselves selecting one of them and gently reasoning with him, suppressing our anger. O my son, we will say to him, you are young, and as time passes, you will change many of the opinions you currently hold. Wait a while, and do not attempt to judge the highest things at present, and the highest thing is that which you currently think nothing of, to know the gods rightly and to live accordingly. And first, let me indicate to you one point that is of great importance, and about which I cannot be deceived. You and your friends are not the first to hold this opinion about the gods. There have always been people, more or less numerous, who have had the same disorder. I have known many of them, and can tell you that no one who adopted this opinion in their youth, that the gods do not exist, ever continued to hold it until they were old. The other two notions certainly do continue in some cases, but not in many. The notion, I mean, that the gods exist but do not care about human affairs, and the other notion that they do care about them but can easily be appeased with sacrifices and prayers. As for the opinion about the gods that may one day become clear to you, I advise you to wait and consider if it is true or not. Ask others, and ask the legislator. In the meantime, make sure that you do not offend the gods. For the duty of the legislator is and always will be to teach you the truth about these matters.
Our address, stranger, so far, is excellent.
Quite true, Megillus and Cleinias, but I am afraid that we have unintentionally stumbled upon a strange doctrine.
What doctrine do you mean?
the wisest of all doctrines, according to many.
I wish that you would speak more clearly.
The doctrine that all things become, have become, and will become, some by nature, some by art, and some by chance.
Isn't that true?
Well, philosophers are right. At any rate, we might as well follow in their footsteps and examine what they and their disciples mean.
By all means.
They say that the greatest and most beautiful things are the work of nature and chance, while the lesser things are the work of art, which, receiving the greater and original creations from nature, shapes and forms all those lesser works that are generally called artificial.
How is that?
I will explain my meaning more clearly. They say that fire, water, earth, and air all exist naturally and by chance, not by art. They also believe that the bodies that come after these elements, such as the earth, sun, moon, and stars, were created by these inanimate existences. The elements are moved by chance and inherent forces, based on certain affinities between them, such as hot and cold, dry and moist, and soft and hard. All other accidental mixtures of opposites have been formed by necessity. In this way, the entire universe, including animals, plants, and seasons, has been created not by the action of the mind or any god, but solely by nature and chance. Art emerged later and produced images and imitations of the truth, such as music and painting. There are also other arts that serve a serious purpose and cooperate with nature, such as medicine, agriculture, and physical education. They claim that politics also cooperate with nature, but to a lesser extent, and are more influenced by art. They argue that legislation is entirely a work of art and is based on false assumptions.
What do you mean?
Firstly, these people would say that the gods exist not by nature, but by art and the laws of different states, which vary depending on the agreement of those who create them. They believe that what is considered honorable is different in nature and in law. They claim that the principles of justice do not exist in nature, but that mankind is constantly debating and changing them. They argue that the changes made by art and law are not based on nature, but are authoritative only at the time they are made. These are the beliefs of wise men, poets, and writers that influence the minds of young people. They are taught that might is the highest form of right. As a result, the young fall into impiety, believing that the gods are not as the law instructs them to imagine. This leads to factions, as these philosophers encourage them to live a true life according to nature, which means exercising dominion over others rather than being subject to them by law.
What a terrible picture you have painted, stranger, and what great harm is inflicted on young men, leading to the ruin of both states and families.
Indeed, Cleinias. But what should a lawgiver do when this evil has been present for a long time? Should he simply rise up in the state and threaten all mankind, proclaiming that anyone who does not believe and think as the law ordains, which can be extended to what is honorable, just, and all things related to virtue and vice, and anyone who does not conform their actions to the standards set by the law shall be punished with death, stripes, bondage, loss of citizenship, loss of property, or exile? Shouldn't the lawgiver, when creating laws for men, also use persuasive language and soften the severity of the punishments as much as possible?
Well, stranger, if such persuasion is possible, then a legislator who possesses any skill should never tire of persuading men. He should leave nothing unsaid in support of the ancient belief in the existence of gods and all the other truths you mentioned earlier. He should support both the law and art, acknowledging that they exist naturally and are creations of the mind in accordance with right reason, as you seem to argue, and as I am inclined to agree with.
Yes, my enthusiastic Cleinias. But when spoken to a multitude, aren't these things difficult to understand, not to mention that they take up a considerable amount of time?
Why, stranger, if we did not grow weary when discussing drinking or music, should we now tire of discussing the gods and divine matters? The greatest help in rational legislation is that once the laws are written down, they remain unchanged. They can be tested at any future time. Therefore, if they initially seem difficult, there is no need to worry because even the dullest person can go over them repeatedly and consider them. And if they are tedious but useful, there is no reason or virtue for anyone to refuse to uphold them to the best of their ability.
Stranger, I agree with what Cleinias is saying.
Yes, McGillis, we should do as he suggests. If impious discourses were not so widespread, there would be no need to defend the existence of gods. But since they are prevalent, such arguments are necessary. And who better to defend the greatest laws when they are being undermined by wicked men than the legislator himself?
There is no more suitable champion for them.
Well, then, tell me, Cleinias, for I must ask you to be my partner, does not he who talks in this way conceive fire and water and earth and air to be the first elements of all things? These he calls nature, and out of these he supposes the soul to be formed afterwards, and this is not a mere conjecture of ours about his meaning, but is what he really means.
Very true.
Then, by heaven, we have discovered the source of this vain opinion of all those physical investigators, and I would have you examine their arguments with the utmost care, for their impiety is a very serious matter. They not only make a bad and mistaken use of argument, but they lead away the minds of others. That is my opinion of them.
You are right, but I should like to know how this happens.
I fear that the argument may seem singular.
Do not hesitate, stranger. I see that you are afraid of such a discussion carrying you beyond the limits of legislation. But if there be no other way of showing our agreement in the belief that there are gods, of whom the law is said now to approve, let us take this way, my good sir.
Then I suppose that I must repeat the singular argument of those who manufacture the soul according to their own impious notions. They affirm that which is the first cause of the generation and destruction of all things, to be not first, but last, and that which is last to be first, and hence they have fallen into error about the true nature of the gods.
Still I do not understand you.
All of them, my friends, seem to be ignorant of the nature and power of the soul, especially in what relates to her origin. They do not know that she is among the first of things, and before all bodies, and is the chief author of their changes and transpositions. And if this is true, and if the soul is older than the body, must not the things which are of the soul's kindred be of necessity prior to those which appertain to the body?
Certainly.
Then thought and attention and mind and art and law will be prior to that which is hard and soft and heavy and light, and the great and primitive works and actions will be works of art. They will be the first, and after them will come nature and works of nature, which however is a wrong term for men to apply to them. These will follow, and will be under the government of art and mind.
But why is the word nature wrong?
Because those who use the term mean to say that nature is the first creative power, but if the soul turn out to be the primeval element, and not fire or air, then in the truest sense and beyond other things the soul may be said to exist by nature. And this would be true if you proved that the soul is older than the body, but not otherwise.
You are quite right.
Shall we, then, take this as the next point to which our attention should be directed?
By all means.
Let us be on our guard lest this most deceptive argument with its youthful looks, beguiling us old men, give us the slip and make a laughingstock of us. Who knows but we may be aiming at the greater, and fail of attaining the lesser. Suppose that we three have to pass a rapid river, and I, being the youngest of the three and experienced in rivers, take upon me the duty of making the attempt first by myself, leaving you in safety on the bank. I am to examine whether the river is passable by older men like yourselves, and if such appears to be the case then I shall invite you to follow, and my experience will help to convey you across. But if the river is impassable by you, then there will have been no danger to anybody but myself. Would not that seem to be a very fair proposal? I mean to say that the argument in prospect is likely to be too much for you, out of your depth and beyond your strength, and I should be afraid that the stream of my questions might create in you who are not in the habit of answering, giddiness and confusion of mind, and hence a feeling of unpleasantness and unsuitableness might arise. I think therefore that I had better first ask the questions and then answer them myself while you listen in safety. In that way I can carry on the argument until I have completed the proof that the soul is prior to the body.
Excellent, stranger, and I hope that you will do as you propose.
Come, then, and if ever we are to call upon the gods, let us call upon them now in all seriousness to come to the demonstration of their own existence. And so, holding fast to the rope, we will venture upon the depths of the argument. When questions of this sort are asked of me, my safest answer would appear to be as follows. Someone says to me, O stranger, are all things at rest and nothing in motion, or is the exact opposite of this true, or are some things in motion and others at rest? To this I shall reply that some things are in motion and others at rest. And do not things which move in a place, and are not the things which are at rest in a place? Certainly. And some move or rest in one place, and some in more places than one. Did you mean to say, we shall rejoin, that those things which rest at the center move in one place, just as the circumference goes round of globes which are said to be at rest? Yes. And we observe that, in the revolution, the motion which carries round the larger and the lesser circle at the same time is proportionally distributed to greater and smaller, and is greater and smaller in a certain proportion. Here is a marvel that might be considered impossible, that the same motion can impart both swiftness and slowness in proportion to larger and smaller circles. That's very true. And when you speak of bodies moving in many places, it seems to me that you mean those which move from one place to another, sometimes having one center of motion and sometimes more than one because they rotate on their axis. And whenever they encounter something stationary, they are divided by it. But if they find themselves between bodies that are approaching and moving towards the same spot from opposite directions, they unite with them. I agree with what you're saying. Also, when they unite, they grow, and when they are divided, they waste away. That is, assuming the composition of each remains the same, or if it fails, then there is another reason for their dissolution. And when are all things created, and how? They are created when the first principle receives an increase and reaches the second dimension, and from there, it reaches the one adjacent to it, and after reaching the third, it becomes perceptible to the senses. Everything that is changing and moving in this way is in the process of generation. It only has real existence when it is at rest, but when it transitions into another state, it is destroyed. Have we not mentioned all the motions that exist, comprehended them under their types, and numbered them, with the exception, my friends, of two?
Which two are they?
Just the two that our current inquiry is concerned with.
Please explain more clearly.
I suppose that our inquiry is about the soul?
That's true.
Let us assume that there is a motion capable of moving other things, but not itself. That is one type. And there is another type that can move itself as well as other things, working through composition and decomposition, through increase and decrease, through generation and destruction. That is also one of the many types of motion.
Agreed.
And we will assume that the motion that moves others and is changed by others is the ninth, and the motion that changes itself and others, and is present in every action and every passion, and is the true principle of change and motion in everything, we shall be inclined to call the 10th.
Certainly.
And which of these 10 motions should we consider the mightiest and most efficient?
I must say that the motion that can move itself is 10,000 times superior to all the others.
Very good. But may I make one or two corrections in what I have been saying?
What are they?
When I spoke of the 10th type of motion, which was not correct.
What was the error?
According to the correct order, the 10th was the first in generation and power. Then follows the second, which we strangely referred to as the 9th.
What do you mean?
I mean this, when one thing changes another, and those changes another, will there be any primary changing element among them? How can something that is moved by another ever be the beginning of change? That is impossible. But when the self-moved changes others, and those others change others, and so on with thousands upon tens of thousands of bodies set in motion, must not the beginning of all this motion be the change of the self-moving principle?
That's true, and I completely agree.
Or, to put it another way, answering our own question, if, as most of these philosophers have the audacity to claim, all things were at rest in one mass, which of the principles of motion would first arise among them?
Clearly, the self-moving principle, for there could be no change in them arising from any external cause. The change must first take place within themselves.
Then we must say that self-motion, being the origin of all motions and the first to arise among things at rest as well as among things in motion, is the oldest and mightiest principle of change. The one that is changed by another and yet moves others is second.
That's true.
At this point in the argument, let us ask a question.
What question?
If we were to see this power existing in any earthly, watery, or fiery substance, simple or compound, how should we describe it?
Do you mean to ask whether we should call such a self-moving power life?
Yes, I do.
Certainly, we should.
And when we see soul in anything, must we not do the same? Must we not admit that this is life?
We must.
And now, I beg you to reflect. Would you agree that we have a threefold knowledge of things?
What do you mean?
I mean that we know the essence, and we know the definition of the essence, and the name. These are the three. And there are two questions that can be asked about anything.
How so?
Sometimes a person may give the name and ask for the definition, or they may give the definition and ask for the name. I can illustrate what I mean in this way.
How?
Number, like some other things, can be divided into equal parts. When it is divided in this way, it is called even, and the definition of the name even is number divisible into two equal parts.
True.
I mean that when we are asked about the definition and give the name, or when we are asked about the name and give the definition, in either case, whether we give the name or the definition, we are referring to the same thing, calling the number that is divided into two equal parts even.
That's true.
And what is the definition of what is named soul? Can we conceive of any other definition than the one that has already been given, the motion that can move itself?
You mean to say that the essence that is defined as the self-moved is the same as what is called soul?
Yes. And if this is true, do we still maintain that there is anything lacking in the proof that the soul is the first origin and moving power of everything that is, or has become, or will be, and their opposites, when it has been clearly shown to be the source of change and motion in everything?
Certainly not. The soul, as the source of motion, has been most satisfactorily shown to be the oldest of all things.
And isn't that movement, which is caused in another by another, but never has any self-moving power at all, the change of an inanimate body? Shouldn't we consider it to be second, or any lower number you prefer?
Exactly.
Then we are correct in saying that the soul is prior to the body, and that the body is second and comes afterwards, and is born to obey the soul, which is the ruler.
Nothing can be more true.
Do you remember our previous agreement that if the soul is prior to the body, the things of the soul are also prior to those of the body?
Certainly.
Then characteristics and manners, wishes and reasonings, true opinions and reflections, and recollections are prior to length, breadth, depth, and strength of bodies, if the soul is prior to the body.
Definitely.
Furthermore, we must not necessarily assume that the soul is the cause of good and evil, base and honorable, just and unjust, and all other opposites, if we suppose her to be the cause of all things.
We must.
And as the soul orders and inhabits all things that move, regardless of their manner of movement, shouldn't we also say that she orders the heavens?
Of course.
One soul or more? I will answer for you that there must be more than one. At the very least, we must not assume that there are less than two, one the source of good, and the other of evil.
Very true.
Yes, true. Therefore, the soul directs all things in heaven, earth, and sea through her movements, which can be described as will, consideration, attention, deliberation, true and false opinions, joy and sorrow, confidence, fear, hatred, love, and other primary motions like these. These motions then influence the secondary motions of physical substances and guide all things towards growth and decay, composition and decomposition, and the accompanying qualities such as heat and cold, heaviness and lightness, hardness and softness, blackness and whiteness, bitterness and sweetness, and all those other qualities that the soul, herself a goddess, uses when she truly receives the divine mind and properly guides all things towards their happiness. However, when she accompanies folly, she does the opposite of all this. Shall we assume all of this, or do we still have doubts?
There is absolutely no room for doubt.
Shall we then say that it is the soul which controls heaven, earth, and the whole world? Is it a principle of wisdom and virtue, or a principle without wisdom or virtue? Let us suppose that we answer as follows.
How would you answer?
If, my friend, we say that the entire path and movement of heaven and everything within it is naturally similar to the movement, revolution, and calculation of the mind, and follows similar laws, then we must say that the best soul takes care of the world and guides it along the right path.
True.
But if the world moves chaotically and irregularly, then the evil soul guides it.
Also true.
What is the nature of the movement of the mind? It is not easy to give an intelligent answer to this question, so I should assist you in formulating one.
Very well.
Let us not answer as if we were trying to look directly at the sun, making ourselves blind at midday. I mean, let us not act as if we can see with mortal eyes or fully understand the nature of the mind. It would be safer to only consider the image.
What do you mean?
Let us choose from the 10 motions the one that most closely resembles the mind. I will remind you of it and then provide the answer on behalf of all of us.
That would be excellent.
Surely you remember us saying that all things are either at rest or in motion.
I do.
And that among things in motion, some move in one place while others move in more than one?
Yes.
Of these 2 types of motion, the one that moves in one place must move around a center, like globes made in a lathe. It is most closely related and like the circular movement of the mind.
What do you mean?
By saying that both the mind and the motion that moves in one place move in the same and similar manner, in and around the same center, and in relation to the same, according to the same proportion and order, and are like the motion of a globe, we created a fitting image that does not discredit our ingenuity.
It reflects great credit upon us.
And the motion of the other type, which is not similar in manner, place, relation, or order, and does not follow any rule or proportion, can be said to be akin to senselessness and folly.
That is true.
Therefore, based on what has been said, it is not difficult to state that since the soul moves all things, either the best soul or the opposite must necessarily move, order, and arrange the revolution of the heavens.
And judging from what has been said, stranger, it would be impious to assert that any soul other than the most perfect soul or souls moves the heavens.
You have understood my meaning very well, Cleinias. Now let me ask you another question.
What are you going to ask?
If the soul moves the sun, moon, and other stars, doesn't she also move each individual one of them?
Certainly.
Let us discuss one of them, and the same argument will apply to all.
Which one will you choose?
Everyone can see the physical body of the sun, but no one can see its soul, or the soul of any other living or dead body. However, there is good reason to believe that this unseen nature surrounds all bodies, perceived only by the mind. So, let us consider the following point using our minds and reflection.
What is that point?
If the soul moves the sun, then we can assume one of 3 possibilities.
What are they?
Either the soul that moves the sun resides within the visible body, similar to how our soul moves us in every direction, or the soul takes on an external body of fire or air and forcefully propels other bodies, as some claim, or thirdly, the soul is without a body but guides the sun through some extraordinary and remarkable power.
Yes, certainly. The soul can only control everything in one of these 3 ways.
And this soul of the sun, which is therefore superior to the sun, whether it moves the sun in a chariot to provide light to humans, or acts from outside, or in any other way, should be considered a god by every person.
Yes, by anyone with even a small amount of sense.
And the same goes for the stars, the moon, the years, the months, and the seasons. Since the soul or souls with every kind of excellence are the cause of all these things, those souls are gods, whether they are living beings residing in bodies and controlling the entire heavens in this way, or existing in some other place and manner. Can anyone who accepts all this dare to deny that everything is full of gods?
No one, stranger, would be so foolish.
Now, Megillus and Cleinias, let us propose terms to the person who has denied the existence of gods thus far, and then leave him.
What terms?
Either he must prove to us that we were wrong in saying that the soul is the origin of all things, and argue accordingly, or if he cannot provide a better explanation, then he must accept our view and live the rest of his life believing in the existence of gods. Let us see, then, whether we have said enough or not enough to those who deny the existence of gods.
Certainly, we have said enough, stranger.
Then we shall say no more to them. Now, let us address the person who believes in the existence of gods, but believes that they do not care about human affairs. To him we say, O best of men, and believing in the gods, you are drawn towards them by some affinity, which makes you honor and believe in them. However, the misfortunes of evil and unjust people in both private and public life, who are considered happy by the judgment of men but are not genuinely happy, may lead you astray from your natural piety. You have seen impious people grow old and leave their descendants in high positions, and their prosperity shakes your faith. You have witnessed or heard of many monstrous impieties and have seen people attain sovereignty and greatness through criminal means, starting from humble beginnings. Considering all these things, you hesitate to blame the gods because they are your relatives. Due to a lack of reasoning and a reluctance to find fault with them, you have come to believe that the gods indeed exist but do not think or care about human matters. Now, to prevent your current negative opinion from turning into even greater impiety, and if possible, to use arguments that may dispel this negativity before it worsens, we will add another argument to the one we originally presented to the person who completely denied the existence of gods. Megillus and Cleinias, please respond on behalf of the young man as you did before. If any obstacles arise, I will intervene and help you, just as I did earlier.
Very well, do as you say, and we will assist you as best we can.
It will not be difficult to prove to him that the gods care about both the small and the great. He was present and heard what was said about the gods being perfectly good and that they naturally care for all things.
No doubt he heard that.
Next, let us consider what we mean by this virtue that we attribute to the gods. Surely, we can say that virtue includes temperance and possessing intelligence, while vice includes the opposite.
Certainly.
Yes, and courage is a part of virtue, while cowardice is a part of vice.
True.
And one is honorable, while the other is dishonorable.
Of course.
The former is a human quality, like other lesser things, but the gods have no part in anything of that sort, correct?
That is something everyone would agree on.
But do we consider carelessness, idleness, and luxury to be virtues? What do you think?
Definitely not.
They fall under the opposite category, right?
Yes.
Therefore, their opposites would fall under the opposite category as well.
Yes.
But do we believe that someone who possesses all these good qualities would be luxurious, careless, and idle, like those whom the poet compares to stingless drones?
And the comparison is quite accurate.
Surely, we cannot assume that God has a nature that he himself despises. Anyone who dares to say such a thing should not be tolerated for even a moment.
Of course not. How could he?
Shouldn't we be completely mistaken in praising someone who has been entrusted with a specific task, if they have a mind that takes care of important matters but neglects the small ones? Think about it. Someone who acts in this way, whether they are God or human, must act based on one of two principles.
What are those principles?
Either they must believe that neglecting the small matters has no impact overall, or if they know that they are important and still neglect them, the neglect must be attributed to carelessness and laziness. Is there any other way to explain their neglect? Because surely, when it is impossible for them to take care of everything, they are not negligent if they fail to attend to things, whether great or small, that a god or some lesser being might lack the strength or ability to manage.
Certainly not.
Now, let us examine those who both confess that there are gods, but with a difference, one saying that they can be appeased, and the other saying that they do not care about small matters. There are 3 of us and 2 of them, and we will say to them first, you both acknowledge that the gods hear, see, and know all things, and that nothing can escape their senses and knowledge. Do you admit this?
Yes.
And do you also admit that they possess all the power that mortals and immortals can have?
They will, of course, admit this as well.
And surely the 3 of us and the 2 of them, 5 in total, have acknowledged that they are good and perfect?
Certainly.
But if they are as we conceive them to be, can we believe that they ever act with carelessness and laziness? Because in us, inactivity is born out of cowardice, and carelessness is born out of inactivity and laziness.
That is true.
Then no god is ever negligent due to inactivity and laziness, for there is no cowardice in them.
That is true.
The only alternative that remains is that if the gods neglect the lighter and lesser concerns of the universe, they neglect them because they know that they should not care about such matters. What other alternative is there but the opposite of their knowledge?
There is none.
And, O most excellent and best of men, do I understand you correctly that they are careless because they are ignorant and do not know that they should take care? Or do they know, and yet like the lowest kind of men, choose the worse option even though they know better, because they are overcome by pleasures and pains?
Impossible.
Don't all human things possess the nature of the soul? And isn't man the most religious of all animals?
That cannot be denied.
And we acknowledge that all mortal creatures belong to the gods, to whom the entire heavens also belong?
Certainly.
Therefore, whether someone says that these things are great or small to the gods, in either case, it would not be natural for the gods, who own us and who are the most careful and best owners, to neglect us. There is also another consideration.
What is it?
Sensation and power are inversely related in terms of their ease and difficulty.
What do you mean?
I mean that it is more difficult to see and hear the small things than the great ones, but it is easier to move, control, and take care of small and unimportant things than their opposites.
Much more so.
Imagine the case of a physician who is willing and able to cure a living being as a whole. How will the whole fare if he only takes care of the greater parts and neglects the smaller ones?
Definitely not well.
The same would be true for pilots, generals, householders, statesmen, or any other such group, if they neglect the small and only focus on the great. As builders say, the larger stones do not fit well without the smaller ones.
Of course not.
Therefore, let us not consider God inferior to human craftsmen, who, according to their skill, complete and perfect their works, both small and great, using the same art. Let us not think that God, the wisest of beings, who is both willing and able to take care, is like a lazy good-for-nothing or a coward who shies away from work and does not think about smaller and easier matters, but only focuses on the greater ones.
Never, stranger, let us entertain a supposition about the gods that is both impious and false.
I believe that we have now argued enough with the one who delights in accusing the gods of neglect.
Yes.
He has been forced to admit that he is mistaken, but he still seems to me to need some words of comfort.
What comfort will you offer him?
Let us say to the young man, the ruler of the universe has ordered all things with the aim of excellence and preservation of the whole, and each part, as much as possible, has a role and function that is appropriate to it. Over these parts, even the smallest fraction of them, ministers have been appointed to oversee, who have perfected them with utmost precision. And one of these parts of the universe is your own, unfortunate man, which, no matter how small, contributes to the whole. And you do not seem to realize that this and every other creation exists for the sake of the whole, and so that the life of the whole may be blessed. You were created for the sake of the whole, and not the whole for the sake of you. Every doctor and skilled artist do everything for the benefit of the whole, directing their efforts towards the common good, carrying out their part for the sake of the whole, and not the other way around. You are upset because you are ignorant of how what is best for you and the universe happens, within the limits of the laws of creation. Now, as the soul combines with one body and then another, undergoing various changes, either on its own or under the influence of another soul, all the player of the game can do is move the pieces, placing the better nature in a better position and the worse nature in a worse position, assigning them their proper place.
What do you mean by that?
In a way that would make it easy for the gods to take care of everything. If someone were to create things without considering the whole, for example, if they were to create a living element of water out of fire, instead of creating many things out of one or one out of many in a regular order, achieving a first, second, or third birth, the transformation would be infinite. But the ruler of the world has a remarkably easy task.
How so?
I will explain. When the king saw that our actions had life and that there was much virtue and vice in them, and that the soul and body, although not eternal like the gods in popular belief, were indestructible once they came into existence, because if either of them were destroyed, there would be no generation of living beings, and when he observed that the good of the soul was naturally intended to benefit humans and the evil to harm them, he, seeing all this, arranged the parts in such a way that their positions would most easily and effectively bring about the victory of good and the defeat of evil in the whole. And he devised a general plan in which things of a certain nature found a certain place and space. But he left the formation of qualities to the wills of individuals. Each of us becomes what we are mostly through the desires and nature of our soul.
Yes, that is true.
Then all things with a soul change and possess within themselves a principle of change. When they change, they move according to law and the order of destiny. Natures that have undergone less change move less and on the surface of the earth. But those that have undergone more change and have become more wicked sink into the abyss, that is, into Hades and other places in the underworld, which terrify people with their names and which they imagine as if in a dream, both while alive and after they are released from the body. And whenever the soul receives more good or evil from its own energy and the strong influence of others, when it has communion with divine virtue and becomes divine, it is taken to another and better place, which is perfectly holy. But when it has communion with evil, it also changes its place of existence. This is the justice of the gods who inhabit Olympus. O, youth or young man who think that you are neglected by the gods, know that if you become worse, you will go to worse souls, and if you become better, you will go to better souls. In every cycle of life and death, you will do and suffer what is fitting for someone like you to do and suffer at the hands of someone like you. This is the justice of heaven, which neither you nor any other unfortunate person will ever escape and which the ruling powers have specially ordained. Pay close attention to it, for it will surely pay close attention to you. If you say, I am insignificant and will hide in the depths of the earth, or I am great and will fly up to heaven, you are neither so insignificant nor so great that you will not pay the appropriate penalty, either here or in the underworld or in an even more savage place where you will be taken. This also explains the fate of those you saw, who had committed unholy and evil deeds and had gone from being miserable to happy. In their actions, you seem to see the gods neglecting them, not knowing how the gods make all things work together and contribute to the greater whole. And do you, bold man, think that you do not need to know this? If you do not know it, you can never have a true understanding of the happiness or unhappiness of life or engage in any rational discussion about them. If Cleinias and our esteemed company succeed in proving to you that you do not know what you are saying about the gods, then may God help you. But if you want to hear more, listen to what we say to the third opponent, if you have any understanding at all. I believe we have sufficiently proven the existence of the gods and their care for humans. The idea that they are appeased by the wicked and accept gifts is something we must not concede to anyone, and something that every person should disprove to the best of their ability.
Very well, let us do as you say.
Well then, by the gods themselves, I implore you to tell me, if they are to be appeased, how are they to be appeased? Who are they, and what is their nature? They must at least be rulers who constantly order the entire heavens.
True.
And how can they be compared to any earthly rulers, or who can be compared to them? How can we find a lesser image of the greater? Are they like charioteers competing with pairs of horses, or pilots of ships? They can be compared to army generals, or likened to physicians who protect the body from diseases, or to farmers who carefully observe the effects of seasons on plant growth. Or they are like shepherds. We acknowledge that the world is filled with both good and evil, and more evil than good. We affirm that there is an ongoing conflict among us, which requires constant vigilance. In this conflict, the gods and demigods are our allies, and we are their property. Injustice, insolence, and folly are our destruction, while justice, temperance, and wisdom are our salvation. These virtues reside in the life of the gods, although we occasionally see traces of them among humans. But on this earth, we know that there are souls with unjust spirits, who can be compared to animals that fawn upon their keepers, whether they are dogs, shepherds, or the best experts. These souls, as the voices of the wicked declare, prevail through flattery, prayers, and incantations, and are allowed to profit without consequence. This sin, known as dishonesty, is like disease in living bodies or pestilence in years or seasons, and in cities and governments it is called injustice.
That is true.
What else can someone say who claims that the gods are always lenient to those who commit unjust acts, if they share the spoils with them? It is as if wolves were to toss a portion of their prey to the dogs, and the dogs, appeased by the gift, allowed them to tear apart the flocks. Mustn't someone who believes that the gods can be appeased argue in this way?
Exactly.
And to which of the classes of guardians can anyone compare the gods without absurdity? Would they say that the gods are like pilots who neglect their duty due to libations of wine and the savor of fat, and eventually cause the ship and sailors to capsize?
Certainly not.
And surely, they are not like charioteers who are bribed to let other chariots win.
That would be a terrifying image of the gods.
Nor are they like generals, physicians, farmers, or shepherds. And no one would compare them to dogs that have been silenced by wolves.
That is unspeakable.
Aren't all the gods the greatest of guardians, and don't they protect our highest interests?
Yes, they are the greatest.
So, shall we say that those who protect our noblest interests, and are the best guardians, are less virtuous than dogs, or even men of moderate excellence, who would never betray justice for the sake of gifts offered by unjust men?
Certainly not. Such a notion is intolerable, and anyone who holds this opinion can be rightly identified as the most wicked and impious among all impious men.
Have we now sufficiently demonstrated the three assertions, that the gods exist, that they take care of men, and that they can never be persuaded to do injustice? Can we say that they are?
We fully agree with your words.
I have spoken passionately because I am zealous against evil men. Let me tell you, dear Cleinias, why I am so. I do not want the wicked to think that, having the upper hand in arguments, they can do as they please and act according to their various beliefs about the gods. This zeal has led me to speak too passionately. But if we have succeeded in persuading people to despise themselves and love their opposites, then the introduction to our laws about impiety will not have been in vain.
Let us hope so. Even if we have failed, the style of our argument will not discredit the lawgiver.
After the introduction, there will be a discourse that will interpret the law. This discourse will proclaim to all impious individuals that they must change their ways and become pious. And to those who disobey, let the law about impiety be as follows: if a person is guilty of any impiety in word or deed, anyone present shall inform the magistrates to aid the law. The magistrates who receive the information shall bring the person before the designated court according to the law. If a magistrate, after receiving the information, refuses to act, they shall be tried for impiety at the request of anyone willing to defend the laws. If someone is found guilty, the court shall determine the punishment for each act of impiety, and all such criminals shall be imprisoned. There shall be 3 prisons in the state. The first will be the common prison near the marketplace for the majority of offenders, another will be near the nocturnal council and will be called the House of Reformation, another, situated in a wild and desolate region in the center of the country, shall be named in a way that signifies retribution. Now, people fall into impiety due to 3 causes, which have already been mentioned, and from each of these causes arise 2 types of impiety, making a total of 6, which are worth distinguishing and should not all receive the same punishment. For those who do not believe in the gods, but still have a righteous nature, they hate the wicked and refuse to do injustice. They avoid unrighteous people and love the righteous. However, those who not only believe that the world is without gods, but are also intemperate, with good memories and quick wits, are worse. Although both groups are unbelievers, the latter group causes more harm than the former. The former may speak disrespectfully about the gods, sacrifices, and oaths, and may influence others to be like them through mockery, if they are not punished. On the other hand, the latter group, who hold the same beliefs and are considered clever, are full of deceit and trickery. They engage in various forms of trickery and sometimes become tyrants, demagogues, generals, hierophants of private mysteries, and sophists with their clever devices. There are many types of unbelievers, but only 2 require legislation. The first is the hypocritical type, whose crime deserves death many times over, while the second type only requires imprisonment and admonition. Similarly, the belief that the gods do not care about humans leads to 2 other types of crimes, and the belief that they can be appeased leads to 2 more. Assuming these divisions, those who have become unbelievers due to ignorance rather than malice or an evil nature should be placed in a house of reformation by a judge and ordered to undergo imprisonment for a minimum of 5 years. During this time, they should have no contact with other citizens except members of the nocturnal council, with whom they can converse to improve their spiritual well-being. Once their imprisonment is over, if any of them are of sound mind, they should be reintegrated into society. However, if they are not, and if they are convicted a second time, they should be punished with death. As for those who not only believe that there are no gods or that they are neglectful or can be appeased, but also, in contempt of humanity, claim to conjure the souls of the living, say they can summon the dead, and promise to manipulate the gods with sacrifices and prayers, and who are willing to destroy individuals, households, and even states for money, anyone guilty of these actions should be condemned by the court. They should be bound according to the law in the prison located in the center of the land. No freeman should ever approach them, and they should receive their food rations from public slaves appointed by the guardians of the law. When they die, they should be cast beyond the borders without burial. If any freeman assists in burying them, they should be punished for impiety if someone brings a lawsuit against them. However, if the guilty party leaves behind children who are fit to be citizens, the guardians of orphans should take care of them, just as they would for any other orphans, starting from the day their father is convicted. In all these cases, there should be one law that makes people less likely to transgress in word or deed and less foolish, as they will not be allowed to practice religious rites contrary to the law. The simple form of this law should be, no one shall perform sacred rites in a private house. When someone wants to make a sacrifice, they should go to the temples and hand over their offerings to the priests and priestesses, who are responsible for maintaining their sanctity. They should pray themselves, and anyone who wishes to join them in prayer may do so. The reason for this is as follows: establishing gods and temples is not an easy task, and it requires great intelligence to do so correctly. Especially people, when they are sick, in danger, facing difficulties, or receiving good fortune, have a tendency to consecrate the occasion, make vows, and promise shrines to gods, demigods, and divine offspring. When they are disturbed by terrifying apparitions, dreams, or visions, they find remedies in altars and temples. They will fill every house and village with them, placing them in the open air or wherever they have had such visions. To address all these cases, we should obey the law. The law also considers the impious and does not want them to believe that by secretly performing these actions, such as building temples and altars in private houses, they can secretly appease the gods with sacrifices and prayers. They are multiplying their crimes infinitely, bringing guilt from heaven upon themselves and those who allow them, even though the latter are better people than they are. Therefore, the entire state suffers the consequences of their impiety, which is deserved. Surely, God will not blame the legislator who enacts the following law: no one shall possess shrines of the gods in private houses. If someone is found to possess them and perform any sacred rites not publicly authorized, assuming the offender is a person who is not guilty of any other great and impious crime, someone who is aware of the fact should report it to the guardians of the law. They should then issue orders for the offender to remove their private rites to the public temples. If the offender refuses, they should impose a penalty until compliance is achieved. And if a person is found guilty of impiety, not just due to childish foolishness, but the kind that even adults can be guilty of, whether they have publicly or privately made sacrifices to any gods, let them be punished with death, for their sacrifice is impure. Whether the act was done seriously or only out of childish foolishness, let the law guardians decide before they bring the matter to court and prosecute the offender for impiety.